Calgary, Canada. January 2008. Born in the Philippines, 41-year-old Arcelie Laoagan was a loving mom to 5 sons. She had been living in Canada for 4 years, hoping to earn more money, eventually having enough to bring her whole family over to be with her. She had flown over with little aside from the clothes on her back, and as scary and lonely as the big move had been, she was determined to follow through on her promise to her boys. They had stayed in the Philippines with their dad, but she wanted the best life for them and was working hard to make it happen. As soon as she got settled in Calgary, she started studying to be an accountant, as well as working 2 jobs. Her friends said she was sacrificing a lot for a bigger and brighter future for everyone. Arcelie was quiet and gentle and mainly kept to herself, but all that changed when she met a group at her local church. She was a devout Catholic, and after joining, her confidence as well as her circle of friends grew, and she was really coming into her own. January 17th, 2008. At 10 p.m, Arcelie was clocking off from one of her jobs, a downtown printing company about 4 miles away. It was a bitterly cold night, with snow covering the ground. Arcelie set off on her hour-long journey home, ready for some sleep before an early start. But an hour and a half later, 911 got 2 alarming and strange calls back to back. It was from Arcelie's friend Melchior and her roommate Christine. They said Arcelie had been attacked. Melchior had gotten a call from Arcelie. She was screaming for help, saying that she was being beaten and raped. It was muffled. Arcelie was crying, and it seemed that the phone was not close to her. The phone call then suddenly cut off, so he had no clue where she was. He jumped in his car to start looking for her, and as he was driving around, he called Christine, and then called 911 himself, just after she made the first call. Neither of them could really tell them anything though, just that their friend was in grave danger somewhere in the area. The dispatcher sent 2 patrol officers downtown to meet Christine, as he got another person to start ringing Arcelie's phone and trying to locate it. Christine got into the police car and guided them to Arcelie's place of work. They drove around for a couple of hours, checking every park, every parked car, every dumpster, every alley. But there was no trace of Arcelie, and her phone was just ringing and ringing. By 2 a.m, there were over a dozen officers out looking for her. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and as it did, their concern was rising. Lying somewhere hurt and unable to call for help was already worrying, but in these conditions it was even more so. Some of the team went to the printing company and they confirmed she had definitely left there at 10 p.m, something confirmed by their cameras. She was wearing a big thick coat, a dark-coloured hat, and was carrying some bags. She had left alone. No one else was walking the streets around her, and no cars seemed to drive past either. A couple of hours later at 5 a.m, this missing persons case would become a murder investigation. Well away from the locations they were originally looking around, someone walking to work found a body next to a church. Authorities could tell right away that it had to be Arcelie, but she was so badly beaten they needed fingerprints to confirm it.
The body of the female was discovered by a passerby while she was on her way to work.
The 40-year-old moved to Calgary 4 years ago from the Philippines. She worked 2 jobs to provide a better life for her 5 sons.
Her trousers were tangled around one ankle and she was still wearing her coat. An autopsy later confirmed that she had died of blunt force trauma to the head and that she had been raped. She had been hit with so much force that her skin had separated from her skull. Her stomach was bruised, her eyes were swollen shut, and her nose, jaw, cheekbones, and bones in her throat were broken. The medical examiner said her head had been so badly injured, her brain had just stopped functioning, and she would have died within minutes. They bagged up everything around her, including her phone, which looked like it had been smashed and broken on purpose. They also found some empty bottles, a construction hat, and a big blue bag. but the bags she had been carrying appeared to be missing, as was her purse. Her family said knowing Arcelie was a deeply religious person made it all the more devastating for them that she was found right outside a church. The officer on scene was also a Catholic, and he said he knelt down next to her body and said a prayer for her, promising to catch whoever had done this. He said he had never done that before, nor had he done it since. Something about this case had hit him very differently. They asked Christine and Melchior about Arcelie's social life. Was there anyone in her life that they should be aware of? But Christine said her friend didn't really have much of a social life outside of her church group and talking to her sons and husband back in the Philippines. She was never out aside from getting her shopping, and she didn't ever stay with anyone after work. She worked and went to church. That's really all she did.
Arcelie Laoagan had been working in Canada for years as a nanny. At the time of her death, she was working in Calgary, doing 2 jobs and sending money to the Philippines to her husband and 5 sons.
She was taking the C train home when she was stalked, sexually assaulted, and then brutally killed on a pathway behind Grace Baptist Church near Franklin Station.
A memorial was held for her before her family made plans to send her body back to be with her husband and sons. More than 400 people filled the church. Given where Arcelie was found, it was obvious she had made her train that night. She was just 5 minutes away from her house, which did give them a timeline to work from, and told them the route she would have taken, which appeared to be her usual one. Arcelie's routine was pretty clockwork. Her boss said she would finish at the printing shop at 10 p.m, walk to the station, getting there about 10 minutes later, and then at about 20 past 10, her train would arrive. Cameras at the station showed this day was no different. She walked down the platform at 9 minutes past 10. It was pretty empty and she didn't stop to talk to anyone. She headed to the end where she sat in a shelter with a couple of people to get out of the wind. The camera quality, which was already pretty poor anyway, was made worse by the bad weather conditions and snow covering the lens. Detectives couldn't tell anything about the people in the shelter with her, but they did not board the same train that she got on. At 10:30 p.m, her train pulled into the stop closest to her home, Franklin Station. She got off, walking briskly towards the exit. Initially it seemed that the station was much the same as the other one. It was fairly quiet and those there were hurrying to get home and warm. But one person caught their attention. A young-looking man in a yellow coat. He started walking quite quickly behind Arcelie. At one point it seemed he was leaning around another man in front to look at her too. This man had been on Arcelie's train, and at the previous stops the police found more footage of him. On one platform at 10 p.m, he was walking up and down before talking to someone for a moment, and then just standing there. A young woman started walking towards him, heading down the platform. When he saw her, he pulled his hood over his face and turned and watched her as she went past him. More footage gave them reason to believe he was following random women around, and given what had happened to Arcelie, it seemed it could be a lead. At the stop just before Arcelie got off, he had jumped off at the platform. He walked up and down aimlessly for a moment, and briefly talked to someone, before quickly hopping back on the same train again. As Arcelie headed towards the escalator, they could see the man in the yellow coat. His pace was quickening. As she got to the top of the escalator, the man pulled his hood up and was literally one step behind her. He was carrying 2 things that caught their eye, a construction hat and a big blue bag. Exactly what the officers had found near Arcelie's body. One of the detectives recognised it as an ironworker's hat and spotted some distinctive stickers and logos on it. Detectives headed to the local ironworkers HQ, and after the manager studied the CCTV stills, he gave them a name: Christopher Waterston. The 21-year-old was now their prime suspect. When they turned up at his address, the first thing they saw was the yellow coat hanging over the chair. The sleeve was covered in blood. They also found Arcelie's purse with her ID and credit cards in there too. A DNA sample was taken from him and it confirmed what they already knew. His DNA was on Arcelie's body, and her blood was on his jacket. Christopher Watcherston was arrested and charged with the rape and murder of Arcelie. He pleaded not guilty and testified in his own defence. It would be a judge-only trial. According to the criminal code, if a sexual assault or unlawful confinement is followed by a homicide, that is first-degree murder. But if that could not be proven, it would be second-degree. All murder convictions carry a life sentence, however a conviction for first-degree murder carried a prison sentence of life with no chance of parole for 25 years, and one for second-degree murder carried a minimum sentence of just 10 to 15 years. The defence argued that not enough was known about the sequence of events, suggesting there was a break between the sexual assault and the murder. They said this created a reasonable doubt against a first-degree murder conviction. But the prosecution said, it's not likely a woman who's just been raped would stay there. The sexual assault culminated with the murder as one transaction. This was absolutely first-degree murder at the hands of a truly evil person. Christopher admitted he had raped and beaten her, but said he had never meant to kill her. He said he was drunk on somewhere between 12 and 24 beers and a small bottle of Southern Comfort that night, as well as smoking salvia. He said he was disoriented and hallucinating. He claimed he thought Arcelie was his mother and that he even called out to her. When Arcelie turned around to look at him, he said he didn't know what to say. His mother had been killed in 2001. He then just started his attack. He said Arcelie was hysterical and begging him not to hurt her. She cried, telling him she was a mother and wife, but he didn't stop. Christopher said he was watching from above as he raped her, before, in his words, snapping out of it and telling her to run away. Arcelie had tried to flee, and that's when she briefly called Melkor, but Christopher grabbed her again and started kicking her in the head with his steel-toed work boots. He said this was an attempt to cause amnesia, but not kill her.
As his trial began this morning, a Calgary man has admitted to a crime that shocked the entire city, the murder of Arcelie Laoagan in January 2008. Christopher Watcherston was later charged with her murder. His trial on first-degree charges began today. Good afternoon. Arcelie Laoagan's killing and the trial that's now underway is our top story tonight. Brian Labby was in court this morning. Brian, we learned a lot of new information about this case in court today.
Yeah, that's right, Normala. Very disturbing details about the final minutes of Arcelie Laoagan's life. Now, in an agreed statement of facts read by the prosecution today, Christopher James Watcherston, who was 21 at the time, followed Laoagan onto a secluded pathway and attacked her. Now, his DNA was found on her body and her blood was found on his clothes. Laoagan's sister was in court this morning. She was overcome with emotion while talking to reporters.
Well, it's been a long time to wait. Heard that is all in question.
Now, Watcherston is being represented by high-profile defense lawyer Alan Hepner, who says he won't be commenting while the Crown delivers its case. Now, the prosecution is expected to call about 30 witnesses over the next 10 days or so, and we'll have more news from the trial and some of the other evidence that was presented. That's coming up at 6 o'clock, including how the defense will balance its not guilty plea with the admission Watcherston was involved in the crime.
The prosecution said he was clearly just making things up as he went along. Whatever he thought would stick and work best for him was what he was running with. A drug expert also testified and said that the effects of the salvia would have worn off by the time of the assault based on the time he said he smoked it, so the excuse of intoxication did not have as much weight as what he was putting on it. The defence said he had had a troubled life, which led him down a path of drink and drugs, and this had all played into him not being in a stable place mentally. He fell through the cracks of life. He fell through every crack the system is designed for. His troubled youth is an understatement in terms of his background, the life he led, his mother being murdered behind a hotel in Saskatchewan, and it just unravelled after that.
A little more than an hour ago, a judge announced the verdict the Laoagan family has been waiting more than 2 years for. Christopher Watcherston.
Despite his lawyer's attempts to get a second-degree murder conviction, the judge found Christopher guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years before he could apply for parole.
So you're alone here?
They've endured more than 2 years of anguish, but this family is determined to make it through another day, no matter how tough it gets.
We're gonna live forever with this pain for the rest of our life.
Today, a verdict for the man who killed their sister. Oswald Sombrito is Arcelie Laoagan's only brother. He flew in from Toronto to find some sense of closure. Finding forgiveness for the man who killed his big sister is proving a lot tougher.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Because what we've been through is, I just can't imagine that someone will experience again what we had.
It's still hard, but we're just human. We have to forgive.
Marlon Horry is one of Arcelie's sisters. She sat in court every day during the trial. She kept her family updated but never spoke publicly. Even now, she has a hard time thinking about what she learned during the trial.
It's hard to accept that the way she was killed.
The whole family holds on to the good memories, but the grief is still there.
I miss my sister.
It's not easy. Every single day, you have to. You have to try to be normal.
Arcelie's 5 children remain in the Philippines with their father. The family want to bring them to Canada, but say immigration officials haven't approved anything yet.
We tried to finish whatever my sister wanted to do.
Well, I still believe Canada is one of the best places to live, so...
That hope is still intact despite tragedy, for a family that wants to keep a mother's dream alive.
Oh, she did whatever for the family. She tried to give them everything.
The now 22-year-old read a brief apology out in court, saying, "I do not know that I will live forever with the sorrow that will always be on my soul." He appealed in 2010, but this went nowhere. Detectives that handled Arcelie's case said they still think of her. It is just one of those cases that sticks with you. The officer on patrol that night that said the prayer next to her body said he drives past that church almost every shift, and every time his mind goes back to that snowy night. Her sister said that Arcelie's children are doing well. They have taken after their father job-wise and now work as engineers. She said she will always be sad that they never got the chance to go to Canada as she had dreamed of.
She was a woman who sacrificed, who worked hard, all for a dream to bring her family to Canada. It was a dream that was shattered the night she died. To date, the family remains in the Philippines. No word yet on when or if they might be given the green light. A trust fund was set up in the meantime, money donated from the Calgary community, some of which continues to go to Arcelie's family back home.
Arcelie's life was for her family. She had already sacrificed so much to provide the best life for them, and she had no intention of slowing down. Friends said travelling to another country alone, knowing no one, to work every hour she could, showed what a determined and hard-working person she was. She was always happy to put herself last, if it meant her loved ones always came first.